Hi, everyone, and welcome to our conversation on the importance of holy relationships. I'm Emily Bennington with the Circle of Atonement, and I'm joined by Robert Perry, founder of the Circle, and we are truly excited to be diving into this topic today. Robert and I have had holy relationships very much on our mind lately as we've been preparing for a workshop called The Road to Holy Relationships that will be held on Sunday, February 28th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern. And you can learn more about that at circleofa.org/events. I should say here at the beginning that if you feel limited when it comes to talking about holy relationships because you don't feel like you're in one, our workshop is called The Road to Holy Relationships because we will be covering not only how to maintain a holy relationship, but how to prepare yourself for one if this feels like something that you're ready to welcome into your life. Both Robert and I believe deeply, and we have our own personal experience as evidence that oftentimes when you go deeper into your own study, practice, and personal development, that's the very thing that opens the door for a true holy relationship to come into your life. But of course, that's not where the work ends. That's where the work is just getting started. So we hope that you will join us for our workshop called The Road to Holy Relationships. And again, that is on February 28th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern. And you can find the details at circleofa.org/events. So Robert, let's get into this.
All right.
All right. So as you and I were planning for our conversation today, we thought it would be fun to answer a series of questions that come up the most around the topic of holy relationships. So let's start with the question that answers the title of this discussion, which is, according to the Course, what is a holy relationship and what is the importance of holy relationships to this path and to our lives overall?
All right. Well, a holy relationship, according to the Course, is a case in which two individuals, two people, join on a common goal or a common purpose. And that joining invites the Holy Spirit into the relationship. Holiness enters the relationship at a deep level, and then the relationship is ideally taken through a process, or the Holy Spirit tries to take it through a process in which that deep level holiness is realized on the conscious level, on the surface level, so that there is a real embodied holiness between the two people.
And this is something that's captured in a paragraph in chapter 2 of the psychotherapy supplement, which of course isn't in the CE, but I'd like to read it here to kick us off. It says, "What must the teacher do to ensure learning? What must the therapist do to bring healing about? Only one thing, the same requirement salvation asks of everyone. Each one must share one goal with someone else, and in so doing, lose all sense of separate interests. Only by doing this is it possible to transcend the narrow boundaries the ego would impose on the self. Only by doing this can teacher and pupil, therapist and patient, you and I, accept atonement and learn to give it as it was received." So
It's a great passage, such a great passage.
it's a beautiful passage, and it
And
covers
actually, that speaks to, I didn't answer the second part of your first question
about the importance
about the importance of it.
Mhm.
So do you want to ask another question, or can I go back to that one?
We can go back to that one. I think the paragraph actually answers that question, doesn't it? But
It really
yeah.
does. Yeah, basically, the importance of holy relationships in the Course is they are a place where, to the extent they are successful and they get towards their goal, people have an experience of being truly joined with something beyond themselves. And so they have an experience of, as that passage you read said, transcending the narrow boundaries the ego would impose upon the self. We go through life experiencing ourselves as separate beings, and to actually have a concrete experience of being in relationship with somebody in a significant relationship of whatever kind, and really feeling a sense of oneness, like you aren't really two different people. You aren't so walled off inside the bubble of your own ego. That's experiential proof, you could say, that you're not an ego. And of course, waking up from the ego is the goal of pretty much any spiritual path. So, this is a very novel and different way of getting outside your ego than we tend to hear about in spirituality.
Yeah, and just as I'm reading this line, each one must share one goal with someone else, and in so doing, lose all sense of separate interest. Well, losing all sense of separate interest sounds good if we're transcending the ego, as you're saying, but one must share one goal with someone else. And so we have been talking so much about special relationships lately in Course Companions. We did a Sunday gathering on it, and you recently hosted a workshop on it. And so, how can we have a holy relationship that doesn't add this layer of specialness in it? Because it seems like if you're sharing one goal with one other person, how could you not have that specialness infused in the relationship itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it has to start with one person. And the Course does acknowledge that holy relationships start out still as special relationships. So they still contain elements of specialness. And the goal is to slowly outgrow that specialness. But it starts there. And I think there's a reason for that. If you're going to ground a pattern that is not of the ego, you have to do it in a specific context. In this case, with one other person, and then the holiness that enters in that relationship can expand beyond it. It can bring light to other people, and it can then sort of begin to include other holy relationships. So it's not meant to stay in that special container, which is acknowledged as special. It's meant to sort of be birthed there. It's like a nest for this to be born and then go out from there.
Yeah. Doesn't he say in the course somewhere that that he's not going to take your special relationship from you? It's just the goal is to turn it into a holy one.
Yeah, and even once it's turned into a holy one, there's a passage that says, it must extend. The relationship must extend to others, just as you extended when you joined with your brother. So
Mhm.
you have to join first with this one person, and then the two of you join beyond that.
Yeah, so the holy relationship is almost like a laboratory where you learn the skills that are of forgiveness that are needed to extend so that you can forgive others outside of your holy relationship. So if you can learn it here, then you can more easily offer it to other people who you're not so intimate and close with.
Right, and it's forgiveness that's being born and extended, and it's joining,
Hmm.
which we don't talk a lot about in course circles.
Well, we're gonna get to that.
Yeah.
So another question that we hear a lot when it comes to holy relationships is, does it take one or two people? Sometimes we hear in the course community that a relationship is holy whenever we can forgive another person, or oftentimes we hear that students will proclaim that their holy relationship is with Jesus. And from a course perspective, this is kind of missing the essence of the teaching. So do you want to say more about this idea as whether the holy relationships takes one or two?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a long history with that whole issue, and it is almost universally understood in Course in Miracles circles that it takes one. One person can make the relationship holy. Uh, I remember a guy, course author, contacted Alan Watson and I back in the '90s. He was doing a poll of various course teachers, and we were the only ones who said it takes two. And he eventually decided, well, it must only take one because I think basically everyone says it does. I know that Nook Sanchez is teaching that it takes two. But what I want to say about that is we approach the term in my view, a completely wrong way. We say, oh, there's this term, holy relationships. And then we ask ourselves, well, based on my general understanding of A Course in Miracles, what must that mean? What can I assume that means? Okay. Well, and the usual assumption is, well, since the Course is all about my mind, then obviously that term must refer to something that's just about my mind. But the problem with that is this is not just a term we should fill with our general Course understanding. This is a Course term. There are 6 chapters in the text through which discussion of holy relationships is heavily featured. 6 chapters in the text versus 3 for really kind of 2 for special relationships. And then the concept and the term plays an important part in the manual for teachers. And then the concept and the term plays an even more important part in the psychotherapy supplement. This is a major course topic. We don't have to just like do this armchair thing where we like kick back and say, well, I can tell you what that term must mean. We can actually open the book and find out what it does mean. And once you do that, the mystery is gone. Universally, in those 6 text chapters in the Manual for Teachers and the Psychotherapy Supplement, the holy relationship is characterized as 2 people who join in a common goal or common purpose. And that joining allows the Holy Spirit to enter the relationship, and it's his entry into it that gives it this presence of holiness that makes it a holy relationship. So there's like zero mystery in the Course. So the Course doesn't like say different things in different places. And I don't see people like quoting those places where the Course actually talks about taking one. The fact is, there's like no debate here if you open the book.
Yeah, and it feels like the answer to that question is right in the language itself. Holy relationship. I mean, relationship implies that there's more than one person involved, and that just seems to be in line with the trend right now in contemporary spirituality, where we kind of almost wiped the other person away entirely in search of our own spiritual advancement. But what I love so much about the Course is that throughout it says that your spiritual advancement comes through your relationship with others. So you can't
Yeah.
just wipe them out in search of your own inner peace. Your advancement is in your interpersonal relationship with them. That's how you grow.
It's a really good point. In fact, the Course, the Course doesn't wipe them off the map. The Course says that's what the ego does. And that's its beef with special relationships, because special relationships are a case where you're basically treating the other person as a non-person. They're just kind of means to your end. And so what he says at one point is an unholy or special relationship is not a relationship. It is a state of isolation, which seems to be what it is not. It just seems to be a relationship. It's actually a state of isolation. Whereas a holy relationship, the term for holy relationship, before he started using that term, there's a few references to the concept before the term comes in. And the earlier references use the term real relationships. And that tells you something. A holy relationship is a real relationship. You're not just in this, you're not acting out an appearance of relationship while you're actually in a state of isolation. You're actually engaging with another being rather than simply using that other being.
Yeah, and we've talked about that so much in our course companions classes and whatnot, that we almost have this ideal that we can climb this ladder of enlightenment alone without any other person being involved. You know, a miracle is a shift in perception, so it's just happening in our own mind. Forgiveness is an opportunity for us to change how we feel about somebody else, regardless of their
Right.
involvement in the process.
Right.
And again, just what I love about the Course is it's like, slow down, speed racer, you're not going to make it unless you begin to see someone else's interests as not opposed or outside or separate from your own. All throughout the course, it's giving us the same kind of message of we go together, you and I, and my advancement's connected to yours and yours is connected to mine. And so why wouldn't, given that this is Jesus's book, why wouldn't that be his plan for salvation, to be through the process of joining? We heal together.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Course is very clear about this. And it's a message I think that's difficult for us because so many of us don't feel like we have a relationship that fits the bill of what the Course is talking about, which we
Mhm.
can talk about as well. Um, but it openly says you can't get there alone. Like there's a passage in chapter 14 where he talks about, if you search for love by yourself, you can't find it. But when two join together in the search, you can. And there's a great quote that then says, the lonely journey fails because it has excluded what it would find. So if you're searching by yourself, the very fact that you're doing it by yourself means that there's been an exclusion of the very thing you're looking for.
Mm. Okay, so just in
Okay.
the interest of time, we'll
Yes.
move on. But let's talk about the forms that a holy relationship can take. Typically, we think it's going to be our romantic partner, but that's not always the case. So, do you want to talk about the different forms?
Yeah, of course, it can be any form. It can be a romantic partner. But what I think is really important is to keep in as much as we can in trying to answer questions like this, keep returning to the book itself. And in those three discussions that I mentioned in the text, in Manual for Teachers, and in the psychotherapy supplement, they aren't just discussions, they each have a fairly specific relationship in mind. Okay. So if we look at those three specific relationships, we get pictures of what he's thinking. And the first in the text, in those 6 text chapters, is he's speaking directly to Helen and Bill's relationship. And we know about their relationship, right? They were not romantic partners. Bill was gay, even though Helen apparently was in love with him. But they were not romantic partners. They were colleagues and friends. And then the next discussion is the Manual for Teachers. It's talking about a teacher and a pupil, specifically on kind of a spiritual path, and more specifically on the path of A Course in Miracles. So you have a teacher who's an experienced student of this path taking on a pupil. And he talks about, those who would learn the same course. And he calls that a holy relationship. So what makes it holy is they have joined in the learning process of learning this course. And the teacher is learning through teaching, and the pupil is learning through the teacher's teaching. But the fact is they have joined in the common goal of learning this course. So that's the next snapshot. And then the final snapshot is the psychotherapy supplements picture of a therapist and a patient. And we can go into more detail about that. But the point is that those are different kinds of relationship. Two colleagues at work who were peers, although Bill was technically the boss. A teacher and a pupil in the context of a spiritual path, and a therapist and a patient in the context of a patient seeking the healing of the mind. None of those are romantic. We shouldn't exclude romance, of course, but it just gives us a sense that this can take a lot of different forms.
Yeah. So, a holy relationship is two people who have joined in common purpose.
Right.
So, what are some examples of that common purpose?
Okay, well, I'll just return to the same three examples that we have in the pages of the course itself. In the first example, Helen and Bill, as we know, they famously joined on let's demonstrate and find a better way. And what they meant specifically was let's find a way in which people can get along. The way Bill put it was people can live in harmony. And they were thinking about themselves, but they were specifically thinking about their department at Columbia, or at the Presbyterian Hospital, And they were thinking about their other work environments because they did a lot of interfacing with other medical centers and so on. And
And the department was toxic, and they were looking for a way to collaborate versus compete.
right. And so their common goal was a pretty concrete, identifiable goal, right? And it didn't have to do with kind of personal gain in the usual sense, like it didn't have to do with making money or being successful. It was something that they could join in that you could argue ask them to step outside their ego, right? Their ego is not going to say, I want total harmony here. The egos want to say, is going to want to say, I want gain for myself. So they joined in a goal that was quite concrete, but there was an egolessness about the goal. Then if we move on to the manual and the example of teacher and pupil, as I said a bit ago, he says those who would learn the same course share one interest and one goal. I think that's the language he uses. And so their common purpose or their common goal is, hey, let's learn this course together. Let me just see if I can find the actual words here. Okay, so those who would learn the same course share one interest and one goal. So that's what I said. Um, word for word. So that was pointless. And then if we go to the psychotherapy supplement, it's therapist and patient. And there he talks about, as the supplement goes forward, he talks about them starting out with divergent goals and having to go through a process in which they reconcile their divergent goals and join in one goal. And the divergent goals are the therapist wants to change the patient, change the patient. The patient wants to have all his problems fixed without changing. And he doesn't really put in a sentence what their goal should be. But if you look at those two different goals and what he's talking about as the real goal, it's the therapist should want to help the patient change his thought system. But that's different than changing the patient from a sinner, a loser, into someone valuable and whole. It's like we're just changing the patient's thought system. And so that's the goal that they ideally would join in if they get past their initially divergent goals.
Yeah, but there's people who are listening who are like, well, hold on, I'm not a therapist and I'm not a teacher and I'm not sure, I'm not Helen and Bill. And so I'm not sure that this really applies to me. But you can join on any goal as long as the goal has the purpose of transcending the ego. So you can join on raising a family, for example. You can join on a business as long as that business has some purpose that's larger than making a profit. You can join on some kind of community activism or social justice initiative. There's all kinds of things that you can join on. Just because the course is saying, the course is pointing to Helen and Bill and teacher and pupil and therapist and patient, doesn't mean that the holy relationship is limited to those categories.
Right. And he talks in the Song of Prayer supplement about people joining in prayer. I think what we can say about this whole issue is that to act out any relationship, some kind of joining has to occur, but the joining is usually ego based. And so it's not a real joining. I'm in it for what I can gain separately. You're in it for what you can gain separately. When our very separate interests stop, happening to happily, dovetail, then we go our separate ways. And you see it all the time in the movies where you have bank robbers and they look like they're joined on the project, but they often end up killing each other and so on because they were in it for what each one can get separately. So joining in a holy relationship can involve any goal that is ego transcending enough that it can make possible actual joining, right? So if this is about the money we're going to make, well, I've got my half and you've got your half. But if it's about a department in which everyone's living in harmony, there's an egolessness implicit in that makes the joining something that makes possible, actual joining rather than I'm in it for me and you're in it for you.
Yeah, and that feels like a key distinction between the special relationship and the holy relationship for those who may be wondering. In the special relationship, you really are just in it for what you can get from the other person to feed your needs. The
Right.
Course is using that language of robbing from them to feed yourself. And so that's a very selfish and individual way to approach a relationship. But in the holy relationship, when you transcend to that, it's you're joining in a common purpose that transcends the ego. So it's not just about you, it's about something larger than you.
And there can be an actual joining. Right. Helen and
Yeah.
Bill could really say, we both want this department to be a place of harmony. And they wouldn't be in that. I guess they could say it and be in it for which they could get for what each one could get separately, but they could say it and be in it truly together. And that's what they were.
Yeah, and that brings up another question that we hear a lot when it comes to holy relationships is does it, so we know that it takes at least two, but there's people often ask, well, can I be in a holy relationship with my church or with my group of course companions or in my own department at work or with my whole family? So what would you say to someone who wants to know if their holy relationship can include a group?
It's a good question. I don't hear that question much because everyone's assuming it just takes me.
Hmm.
But I'm sure the question does get asked. And what I would say is that there has to, the point, what I think about our relationship with this term is that we want to be able to claim the term, right? I want to be able to wear that badge. I'm in a holy relationship. And we want to almost like reduce the requirements until we can wear it. And the point is not to be able to claim the title. The point in the course is holy relationships are transformative relationships. They change the people involved. Okay, something happens that is profound in a holy relationship. So the relationship has to be a significant enough relationship. I mean, there's the one condition we talked about where the goal, there has to be a goal you've joined in that you've really joined in it in an ego transcending way. But then the other thing is it has to be a significant enough relationship where it changes you. And can that happen on a group level in a study group? I think it absolutely can. But I think it's also telling that he talks about it as a one-on-one relationship because I think something happens in one-on-one relationships. It gets more serious, it gets more challenging, it kicks up more of your ego. If you can get past ego, it's more transformative. I think he talks about it on the one-on-one level. He even says, a one-to-one relationship is the means of return in the psychotherapy supplement. So I think it can happen on that group level and be powerful, but you know, I think he's mainly thinking about it on the one-on-one level because of he wants it to be a powerful, transformative relationship.
Yeah, and obviously the most powerful and transformative relationships are when you can get in there with one other person and really work on your stuff together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've been in groups where there's a wonderful feeling in the group, but think it's still generally not as powerful as two individuals who are being in that situation, like Helen and Bill.
So if you really want to get in there with your holy relationship partner, and I think we speak from experience on this one, the course talks about having a joint special function that you can work on together. So can you describe what a joint special function is that you'd be working on with a holy relationship partner?
Yeah, and it talks about it doesn't say quote joint special function, but it talks about a special function that you both share, which is obviously a joint function. Um, well, this is a surprisingly prominent feature of the holy relationship discussions. That famous line about the ark of peace is entered two by two, but the beginning of another world goes with them. That's talking about the two people, two by two. They enter the ark two by two. Um, Entering the ark, which is not specified, I assume it's the holy instant, and they come there to learn their special function in God's plan for the salvation of the world. So that place and many other places in the Course envisions the two people being given a job to do in the world's salvation. And, Course students often don't think this way, like, what? We have a job to do to save a world that does not exist. But this is a major teaching in the Course. And it's not just a major teaching in the Course, it's how the Course was produced, right? The Course is the special function of a particular holy relationship, i.e., Helen and Bill's. That's what their holy relationship was producing to give the world. And you don't get any more concrete than a function of writing and editing and publishing a book, right? That is a super concrete thing to do. And that was their joint special function. So he envisions people coming together and not just having the development that happens between two people in a significant relationship with a truly common goal. He's talking about them sharing the fruits of their relationship. And this is a really major feature of the obstacles to peace section in chapter 19, the text, which is like the biggest section in the whole text. What he says is peace has to first rise within the two people and get past the obstacles that they put up to it. But once that peace rises in their relationship, it's then going to go out to the world, and their relationship's going to become a temple of healing where all the weary ones can come and rest. So I'm sure that that special function can take a million different forms, but it's very much a part of the Course's picture.
Isn't that just so beautiful and so of God that two people would be brought together to heal themselves by forgiving each other, to have a holiness as a goal of the relationship to heal, and then through their healing, heal others. And so that the two of them together are able to impact more than they ever could have individually, and they're able to do it better because they have practiced so much with each other in their own lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have some, I think too few, but we have some examples of that. For instance, Helen and Bill. It was clear that without Bill, this wouldn't have happened, even though Helen was the channel. And an example that you and I talk about a lot is that of Peter and Eileen Caddy, who were the co founders of the Finhorn community in Scotland. They were this great team because she would get the guidance and he was this man of action who would carry out the guidance, whatever it was. And he could go to immense lengths to carry out the
He really
guidance that
didn't
she
ask
got.
twice, did he? He just Eileen said it and he started running.
He just did it. Yeah. And so that community was born in large part. There was a third member as well, but it was born from the collaboration of these two people. Uh, and I think that is the way of the future. Like we're used to leadership happening of particular gifted individuals or particular strong individuals. And, that's just part of how things work in this world. And I think God's plan will continue to work that way. That was Jesus's model, right? But I think in the future, we're going to see more instances where two people have joined in something that kind of fits the bill the Course talks about. And it's through their collaboration that change is brought about.
And they have help because the Course also says that when two people join in a holy relationship, the Holy Spirit enters. And so, what does the Course have to say about the Holy Spirit entering into a holy relationship and guiding it as it moves forward?
That is a really main feature in the discussions about holy relationships, especially in the text. And the idea is that if you join, I mean, some of us are familiar with the language in the text about inviting the Holy Spirit into the relationship. So from that, we think, oh, okay, the way to have a holy relationship is we invite the Holy Spirit in, which is a great idea. But unfortunately, it misses a subtlety. And the subtlety is that material is talking to Helen and Bill. And the way they invited the Holy Spirit in was as two total non believers in the Holy Spirit. They said, let's find a better way. right? It was completely secular. What invited the Holy Spirit in was having that common goal, because egos can't join in a common goal. They can only join separately and, for their own separate purposes. And so the Holy Spirit's invited in anytime. Even hardcore atheists unite in a truly common goal. And then the Holy Spirit becomes what I call a third presence in the relationship. There are now three actors on the scene, and he is now trying to take the relationship. I often talk about it as, as you're like on a roller coaster ride. You climb into this cart, and once you climb into the cart on a roller coaster ride, you're not in control of where it goes. You go where it goes. And there's a lot of that with the holy relationship.
Or you say no.
Or you say no and you bail,
Hmm.
right? Which I think is super common given human nature. But what happens is he takes you on a ride that's a new ride. It's not just a repeat of where you've been, what you've done, how it's gone before. He takes you on this new ride. You go new places. Think about Helen and Bill's lives. They went places they never would have guessed because of the entry of this third presence into their relationship. And Helen started having spiritual experiences. She started hearing inner guidance, all of which was a concrete testimony to that third presence actually being there. So the point is that the Holy Spirit is there, trying to guide you to the goal he has set for you, which is kind of your goal. I think is like a specific vehicle for a much deeper goal and a much larger goal that he's trying to guide you to. And I think that's one way you're in a holy relationship, is when it feels like your hands are not on the wheel here. You're in the cart.
Yeah, and Helen and Bill are such a good example of this because they joined on a very relatable goal of trying to make a better department in which they worked, to have an environment that wasn't so toxic where people could collaborate versus compete. And so they joined on that. And then all of a sudden, Helen started having these experiences, and then next thing you know, the course is coming through. So what they joined on was different than where the Holy Spirit wanted to take them. And that is, as you're saying, very reflective of what happens in a holy relationship. And you can too, certainly speak from experience on this. Like, you come in and you think you're doing one thing, and the Holy Spirit's like, well, actually, what I'm going to do is use the skills that you have gained for yourself, that you think that you built because you wanted them to serve yourself, and I'm going to use them to serve my purposes. And at that point, you feel a little out of control, and that's where people start bailing, because we
Right.
don't want to relinquish this much control of our lives. Because once the Holy Spirit enters, once that third presence enters your relationship, buckle up, because
Right.
you don't often know where that card is going.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, we all love control. But to talk about the relationship between the goal we join on and his goal for us, I think the relationship is a harmonious one. I think he sees our goal, which does contain egoless content, or we couldn't truly join. He sees our goal as like a vehicle for his goal. And then he takes his goal and he fills our goal with it, so that our goal broadens and deepens and so on. So Helen and Bill, they wanted to find a better way in which people could live in harmony and get along. Well, Jesus used that to dictate this, very long book, which is the better way, right?
Hmm.
Now, the better way he teaches, it's so much more than anything they could ever have imagined. But it does, unbeknownst to, I think, a great many of us course students, it does very much have to do with living in harmony with each other.
Yeah, and as I'm sitting here reflecting on what I just said, I hope I'm not scaring people, because
No, I'm sure you're not.
well, what ends up happening is when that third presence enters, you do realize that you're on a ride that isn't of your making, and that is when our control issues kick in, and oftentimes we bail on the relationship. But if you can stick through it, you realize, oh, God and the Holy Spirit knew me so much better than I knew myself, and the plans that they had for me on this cart, in this cart, were so much better than any of the plans that I had for myself beyond my wildest dreams. And so if you can stay in the cart and trust, then you realize that it's a ride that you want to be on. And do you want to say anything about that, or do you want me to move on?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I
Okay,
mean, I
because I
just
know
agree with
we're
all that you're saying.
do what?
I agree with all you're saying. So
Yeah.
keep going.
Okay. Well, we're kind of running out of time here, but the course does teach, or at least it has within it, a progression of the holy relationships, so that there are certain stages that we can anticipate. We know we've been brought together with a partner to achieve a common goal, and we know that the third presence, the Holy Spirit, has entered. What are the next steps in the relationship?
Well, I think we should back up just a bit because the course acts like the holy relationship is a special relationship that has been transformed. So with Helen and Bill, they already knew each other. They've been fighting for years, and then something entered in that was new and that changed the relationship. So he acts like many, if not most, holy relationships will be prior special relationships in which people, after a period of time, suddenly join in a truly common goal. On the other hand, he speaks of the other model in the manual where teacher and pupil are drawn together and they come to the right place at the right time. They meet and form a holy relationship. So I think there's two different models that can get you there, right? Um,
So
so
special to holy, or just join on a holy goal?
right, meet because you've been guided to join on a holy goal, and then you do that. And I'm sure there are shades in between. But so you join the goal, which may happen in some particular moment, which it did with Helen and Bill, but it may not. I mean, with the therapist and patient discussion in the psychotherapy supplement, it just sounds like they go through this process, and at some point they finally reach a truly common goal. But there may be no magic moment at which that happens. But anyway, once they've reached their common goal, the Holy Spirit enters. Uh, and what's talked about in the text, and I'm not sure if all holy relationships go through this, but they pretty much seem to, at least almost all, is they go through what he calls the period of discomfort. And we can talk about that in more detail if you want, but that's a time in which the relationship is shifting gears out of being a special relationship, and the two people are still attached to the specialness, and very challenged by this new development and where they're going. And I think he says a lot of relationships are broken off at this point, but hopefully you get past that. Um, and getting past that means that there is an increasing amount of real forgiveness, increasing amount of real love and kindness, and real joining. So the two people join more and more and more. They experience a common state of mind where what one person feels, the other person will feel. If one person goes into fear, the other person will too. And I'm sure that's partly about like mind to mind influence, not just one person being afraid and making the other person afraid with their behavior. So they get more and more united, and in that process they transform, and they become, they sort of get rushed along the spiritual path to the goal in much quicker time than otherwise. And in the meantime, they somewhere along the line they acquire a joint special function, or so it seems. That is such a big feature, as I was saying, of the discussions. And then what's born in their relationship expands out to others, um, bringing light to the world in various forms, and presumably becoming new holy relationships around the first one. Um, so that's that's the gist of the progression that it's supposed to go through if they make it that far, which I think is a huge if.
I know, and as we've been talking about, so many holy relationships don't actually make it. I mean, even Helen and Bill's relationship ultimately fizzled out in the end. They achieved their joint special function of bringing the course into the world, and we're all grateful for that. But in the end, it was that interpersonal difficulty that did them in. Same thing with Peter and Eileen of the Finhorn community. And so we don't have a lot of great examples of holy relationships as we look around, or at least not holy relationships that have lasted. And so it's good to keep in mind that there is this progression, and it does have some steps that you can anticipate. For example, the Holy Spirit's going to come in and take you to a place that maybe you don't think you're ready for, you certainly couldn't have expected. And so if you can expect that, if you can learn, okay, well, I'm going to be comfortable with the fact that I'm going somewhere I didn't plan to go, and just kind of breathe through it. And then also, when you get into the holy relationship, know to expect that period of discomfort where you and the other person are kind of rubbing up against each other, but to know that that's part of the process. You're in a relationship now, their stuff's going to come up, your stuff's going to come up, you work through it, opportunities to forgive, et cetera, et cetera. If you can expect that, then you're more willing to move through that discomfort too, versus just chucking this partner in search of the next one, right? So, and then all you do is end up with another special relationship. And so it's helpful to know what these stages are, so you can prepare for them and move through them with more grace and ease.
Right. What happened in my experience is I saw and was in holy relationships that fit the bill, but didn't get out of the period of discomfort. And I thought, what's going on here? And the more time went on, the more I thought, Helen and Bill's case, I mean, they stayed in relationship, they talked every day, but as it was not healed at all. Um, I started to think, I think Helen and Bill weren't this disappointing exception. They're the norm, because it takes a lot to go, as far as the holy relationship is trying to take us. And once I realized that, I thought, oh my God, he says that in the manual for teachers. He's talking about teacher pupil relationships. Um, but he says there are these comparative few that really make it, that are lifelong and that learn the lesson. He says if they decide to learn that lesson, they become the saviors of the teachers who falter and may even seem to fail. No teacher of God can fail to find the help he needs. So, what he's saying is few really make it, but the ones who make it become saviors to those who struggle and may not make it. That's a nice picture.
Yeah, it is a nice picture. And it's a nice aspiration to say, I want to be in a relationship where holiness is a goal, and I'm going to work towards that so that I can have a relationship that does make it and serve as an example to others. And if more people had holiness as the goal, something that transcends the ego, and went into the relationships, not just saying, here's what I want to do to get mine, but I'm looking at something higher than just my needs in this moment, we would just have a completely different world. And that's what it's
Mm,
saying, that
yeah.
holy relationships can bring forth a different world.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I think getting there, I mean, it's easier to start one than to get to the goal, right? Because
yeah.
getting to the goal is not about you learn these really great techniques for making relationships work. Getting the goal is about egolessness. It's about willing to relinquish the human ego, which is an anti-joining thing. How do you join? You relinquish the thing that's anti-joining in you.
Yeah, and that's why we so often students are like, well, I want to find a holy relationship, and how do I do that? And then you're with them for a while and they find the relationship only to realize this is where the work is starting. Like, this isn't
Right.
this Shangri-La. Now that I've found the person, it's this is the new beginning. And
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's like you think you've arrived in Shangri-La and all the hard work is behind you. when it's probably ahead of you.
Yeah. It's like those snaking lines at Disneyland where you think that you're making progress and all you've done is turn the corner only to see
Right.
that the line continues
Right.
to snake.
Yeah, it's like you're not in Shangri-La, you're in the endless line, to waiting to get into Shangri-La.
So we are just about out of time,
Okay.
but another question, and I know that we are going to address this more fully in our workshop on February 28th, but for those who are listening who are like, well, I'm not in a relationship, but I would like to know how to get one or what I can do to prepare myself to be in a relationship, what would you advise for them?
Yeah, well, just to say a bit more about why we chose that topic, I've I've hardly said much about holy relationships for a long time. Just because when I do, everyone's like, well, there's a small subset that says, "Oh my God, I know exactly what you mean," and they get it because they've been in it, happily or not. And then most everyone says, "I just am not relating to this teaching because I don't feel I'm in what you're talking about." And then I just think, why am I teaching about this? It seems impractical it seems useless for people. Like, what's the point? And so it seems like the more useful thing is to talk about how do we ready ourselves to be in such a relationship. And it's really the same traits, the same things that will allow us once in the relationship to actually make progress. So it seemed like a better topic to focus on. Okay, how do we become ready, become suitable? Because then when we're suitable, A, the holy relationship partner shows up, or we realize they've always been there all along. We just hadn't formed that common goal yet. And B, once we're in one, we can be the suitable partner that can help that relationship reach its goal. So it seemed more practical to make the workshop about that. And was the question,
How do we do it?
how do we do it?
Yeah.
Well, I think that it ultimately comes down to weeding out those things in us that are anti-joining. And the course has we'll be talking about a whole series of things that the course talks about that we have to look at in ourselves and let go of and allow them to be replaced, because those things stand directly in the way of joining, even though many of them go by the name of love in our society. So it's about weeding out the things in us that in some way shy away from, recoil from real joining.
Yeah, and the sneaky thing about the ego is so many of us think, well, that doesn't really apply to me because I want to join and I would be really good at it. And so where is this relationship? And what you realize when you do join with someone is that there are things in all of us, i.e. the ego, which is no matter how much we tell ourselves that we want to join, is anti-joining even within a joining. And so
Yeah.
the work also becomes looking at that and rooting it out so that we can express love to our partners and through our holy relationship express love to others.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I hear so commonly, we'll talk about this more in the workshop, is I want to join and I feel ready, but I don't really trust the other person to join with me. I just don't feel like I can count on them to join with me. And of course, one of the, significant anti-joining elements in us is lack of trust, right? So that very statement, I'm ready, but I can't count on them to join with me, is a statement of I'm not ready, or at least there's a significant lack of readiness in me.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'll just add before we close, we did this workshop a couple weeks ago on projection, and one of the questions was, how do you know if you're doing it? And it's you know that you're projecting when you're the one who's always right, the other person is always wrong. You're the innocent victim of their errors and their mistakes and their wounds, et cetera, et cetera. And
Your
what
intentions
was
are always good.
that your intentions are always good, their intentions are always wrong. And it was incredible just how many people in the workshop were like, oh yeah, I do that. And so you realize that even in our loving joining relationships, there's so many ways that are at play that we are breaking apart, right? Like we are
Yeah.
anti-joining within our
Right.
joinings. And so these are the kinds of things you and I've been talking about. These are the kinds of things that we can work on in any relationship that we have. And that through the practice of that in just casual relationships, friends, family, whatever, we practice the attitudinal musculature that enables us to come together in a true holy relationship and be successful at it. So
Yeah. I mean, we can thin the walls of the ego in any relationship, in any setting, and all of that makes us ready to join with someone. And when we're ready, the someone who's ready to join with us will appear.
well, that seems like the perfect place to end. That was a beautiful closing sentence, but is there
Sounds good.
anything else that you would like to say
I
before
would
we?
just say that this is a very real phenomenon. It happens to people the world over, course students, non-course students, spiritual people, atheists, whoever. This is a real thing. It's just that it's not talked about and it's not known. So those of us who have not experienced it look at this concept and say, "What?" But it's a real thing, um, and it's profoundly transformative. And the course is banking on its transformative power to get us past our ego, outside of our ego, in a way that nothing else can.
All right. Another beautiful ending. So I hope that those of you who haven't already registered for our workshop on February 28th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern called The Road to Holy Relationships. If you haven't registered, we hope you will. You can do that at circleofa.org/events. If this topic is resonating with you, Robert and I would love to see you on the 28th. So with that, we will wrap there. And Robert, thank you so much once again, and we'll see you next time.